So I want to start off tonight by extending a conversation that we had last night. I talked with Nate Hockman about his new piece at the National Review regarding how 21 House Republicans, including Representatives Chris Stewart, Nancy Mace, Elise Stefanik, and Nicole Maliotakis, among others, are now working to pass the Fairness for All Act. And don't be fooled by its somewhat innocuous name. It's basically the left's Equality Act, which would insert vague language about gender identity and sexual orientation into civil rights law to make them federally protected identities in the same way that biological sex, race, and disability are. That would be the death knell for both single-sex spaces and, even more importantly, for the truth that men are men and women are women and that one cannot become the other. The reason why these Republicans are pushing their watered-down version of the bill so hard is because they see the left-wing push of LGBTQ militancy as just inevitable. So they think that making this compromise will at least offer some protections for religious institutions, but that is false on two major counts. One, the protections only extend to institutions and not to individual religious people, like the Colorado cake baker Jack Phillips, or to those who are not necessarily religious but who do not want to put 3-year-olds on hormone blockers or perform hysterectomies on perfectly healthy teen girls who've been lied to about their gender identities. But also, too, and arguably more importantly, the only reason why this leftist social re-engineering seems so inevitable to us on the right is precisely because we keep making these concessions to the left. We keep accepting the playing field that the left uses, agreeing to their rules, and then wondering why we're always on the back foot. The Fairness for All Act further cements in this increasingly post-Christian and even anti-Christian America is that all that exists is the material reality that we see around us, that any notions of God are either false or are entirely irrelevant to the good governance, as if the kingdom of God only lasts for 1 hour on Sundays. That's what the pathetic carve-outs mean and what it implies to the public, that the right agrees with the left on keeping God in his place, so to speak, subservient to the state. That's what that means, even if those Republicans don't consciously know it, and I'm sure they don't. And they think that maybe they're actually helping to head off the inevitable. We must instead, though, affirm that God's truth is the natural law. It has both material and spiritual implications, in the same way that humans have both material, i.e. physical, and spiritual components. There is no other truthful framework from which to operate. If that makes you feel all squeamish inside, that's what years of secularist brainwashing does. Remember that separation between church and state does not appear in the Constitution. It does not mean what most people think it means. It was written in the letter to the Danbury Baptists by Thomas Jefferson, who wanted to calm their fears about a state religion causing persecution against smaller denominations. But what Jefferson meant by the wall was that clergy of any one denomination would not be running the government. He did not mean that the lay people of America's churches, you and I, would not play an important role in our governing. In fact, the Founding Fathers stressed that our experiment in self-governance can only be successful if Americans are a well-educated and moral people, which was taken to mean a believer in the one true God. Up until fairly recently, historically speaking, Congress was opened with Christian worship services. There were presidential calls to prayer and fasting, and kids prayed openly in schools. But over the last 50 years or so, we gutted that. And now some on the right think this new secular world that we find ourselves in is somehow the norm that the Founding Fathers wanted. Do you really think the colonial army left bloody footprints in the snow outside Valley Forge and suffered smallpox outbreaks in their fight against the British so that their descendants could lay on their couch all day getting high and engaging in polyamory with full societal backing? That's not what they meant by liberty or by freedom. It's literally right there in the Bible in Galatians when Paul tells the people there, quote, "You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love." That's what freedom means, the ability to live rightly. If you instead use that freedom to indulge in vice, then they become the new fetters, meaning chains of your slavery to sin, such as promiscuity, drugs, lying, slothfulness, anger, etc., which only work to destabilize families and communities. Secularism is what led us to leftism. It's just a void. That's why we can't go back to it. There's nothing there to go back to. It's based on the same lies as the Fairness for All Act, that we can keep God in a corner in a box somewhere, and how it views God's role in society. The left believes that they can remake man in their own image, meaning they can create new value systems out of whole cloth, and that they can even change physical reality, such as biological sex and the humanity of the unborn, to meet their ever more cravenous desires. Whereas we on the religious right happily understand that we live in a world created by God, and that by understanding the limits of reality, and by learning the best ways to know and love Him, that we will discover human flourishing in Him and only in Him. Ask G.K. Chesterton, the famous 20th century author and philosopher. He once said that without God, there is no purpose. So if you do not affirm the existence of God in your everyday life, and thus the end to which human beings are ordered to, then humans only exist as just accidental evolutionary meat puppets on a rock in the middle of a vast and empty space just floating around, who will all one day die, be buried, and have worms feasting on their organs. Their past loves and losses and triumphs having been nothing more than phantasms of the mind produced by neurochemical signals, the movement of sodium and potassium across the membranes of nervous tissues. No wonder so many lefties are mentally ill and refuse to grow up with 50-year-old men wearing pigtails and skirts. I mean, that's a depressing worldview to hold. The left then tries to fill that emptiness with sex, drugs, rioting, virtue signaling, and even greater forms of self-worship, in which outright narcissism is rebranded as just loving yourself. This is the fight that we're up against. That's why we can't back down on this. We need to understand this as our political fight becomes more philosophical in nature. Who are human beings? What's our worth? What's our potential? What are we here for? So this conversation is what sets the ground for our theme tonight, which is the flailing and failing Biden economy, and its relation to how the powerful elites see us as human beings, not as children of God made in His image and likeness, but as mere cogs in a machine to be moved around. So first, let's look at this recent tweet Biden's handlers uploaded to his official Twitter page, saying, quote, "Nearly 2 million women in our country have been locked out of the workforce because they have to care for a child or an elderly relative at home. My Build Back Better Act will make caregiving accessible and affordable and help them get back to work." Joining us now to discuss what's wrong with such a worldview and how it ties back to our discussion from earlier is Saurabh Sharma, the president of American Moment. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thanks for having me on, Kara.
Great. So what does this tweet get wrong in its worldview?
I think the core of it is that it thinks that the best and most ultimate end that every American has to pursue is increasing the GDP growth of this country. I mean, this has been a bipartisan mistake in all of our politics for the last couple of decades. But the idea is that, we've lived in an America over the last couple of decades where there's not really any innovation going on. We've outsourced all of the real manufacturing, all the real industry. But unfortunately, politicians still need to make that stock market go up. Otherwise, their friends on Wall Street are upset. So what's the best way to make sure that that keeps happening? It's by making more people enter the workforce. So when you can make it so that the nuclear family is broken down, the traditional one person working, one person staying at home with the children, well, now we want both people to work. So that's one extra GDP grower that's in the economy. And then also you'll have to pay someone to take care of those kids. So that's another one. And so it's this cult of GDP growth above all that has infected both parties. And it really underlines how the Democratic Party, even though it once was the party of labor, maybe a more moderate approach in economics, they're just as neoliberal and just as in the toe of financial elites as the most corporate wing of the GOP is. That this Biden mindset that the ultimate end that every woman should be pursuing is to be in the workplace, God forbid they're taking care of their children, is certainly a bipartisan fallacy.
It is, and they make it like it's something to be looked down upon, like it's, oh, you just stay home and care for your loved ones, whether it be the parents who gave you life or the children that you birthed and that you are now caring for. They look down and go, oh, poor you. You're not like me with my power lunches at my corporate little office, as if that's what the meaning of life is. And that's what the left loves. They want to atomize us. They want to break us up in our family so that we don't have those binding community ties and everything else that goes with it. That's why also they're trying so hard to smash our culture here in America. That's another big reason that we're seeing all of that. And I think it kind of leads to the twin evils of abortion and euthanasia as well, because, what do we tell, older people, or we tell, babies in the womb? What's it to you? Why should I let you live? That's usually the main argument, you hear from the left. Is your heart beating? Can you live outside the womb? Everything else they say, because if not, we're going to just kill you. And that's unfortunately where we see a lot of that really nastiness come from, do you think?
Exactly. And it goes back to that completely corporate and financial mindset when it comes to human beings. What's a child? It's something that might end up causing that working woman to have to take a couple of months off in order to have a kid and take care of it. We can't have that. there's an economy to take care of. After all, there's a GDP line that has to go up. Same thing when it comes to euthanasia, right? Old people that are sick and need people taking care of them. Well, unfortunately, for the same reason that we can't have people taking care of their children, no one can stay home to take care of their parents and grandparents. And so you stick them in the old folks home. It turns out that that's a pretty dystopian place to live. It makes people unhealthy. It makes people unhappy, and it leads them to die slow and miserable deaths. Well, why don't we just speed that up a little bit? Use this chemical industry that we've created, this biopharmaceutical regime that we have, to just quicken that up a little bit. That's the way that our elites think. They don't actually think human beings are valuable in and of themselves. They only think about it in terms of what those people can do to serve the bottom line of corporate America, the bottom line of our financial industry, and the bottom line of transnational elites.
It is, and of course, this is yet another way that the government likes to get in between parents and their children by saying, oh no, we're really trying to help you to get back into the workforce. Let us take your, babies basically in diapers and start the indoctrination even earlier. So that's yet another big piece to this whole puzzle. And also what I really don't like is this new growing trend, this idea that we're seeing, even a lot of libertarian friends on the right will kind of eat this up as well as the left, is this idea that you're not truly free and you're not truly liberated in America until you can indulge in your worst vices, that you can go around and, get high all the time or sleep around or, live in any kind of crazy, excessive, overindulgent way. And that, having kids to take care of or family members to take care of, that is seen as some kind of unfair oppression on you, the individual. And that is a completely backwards way to look at life, because I live to serve. People know me as my relations to my family. They know me as a daughter and a sister and a loved one. That's who I am at heart. And so to break that away from me, it's just such a sad way to see the individual.
Exactly. And ultimately, it goes to the radical individualism that people have elevated as God has withdrawn or has been taken out from American society through things like the Supreme Court overreaching its bounds, through things like, legislators in many states and even federal legislators taking it out. People have no way to find meaning except as radical individuals. And turns out that's no way to run a society. That's no way to run a country. And it has a lot to do why people are as unhappy and miserable as they are, because ultimately they're going to find their meaning in something. And if they can't find it in faith because it's been chased out of the public square, they're going to find it in another distorted religion, which is leftism, which teaches people to live morally depraved lives, to be purely economic units, and to just be consumers in this globalized world that we live in.
It is, and I think that kind of goes wide to, it seems like these days everything is so polarized and we can't agree on the most basic principles. We can't even, agree that when you get mad about something, you can't go smash your next door neighbor's windows and take all of his stuff. And of course the left goes, well, I want to do it. And that's just like, now that's the new thing. It's what's it to you? I'm going to do it. Are you going to stop me? And that's this new radical trend that, as we were saying, the radical atomized individual. Of course, big government absolutely loves that, because then we're too busy tearing each other down than going up against the strong powers that be, that are crushing the middle class, which is their biggest competitor. But before I let you go tonight, I just have to ask you, we know why the left does it. We know what they get out of it. But a lot of Republicans, whether or not they know it, they repeat a lot of these talking points. Is that because of, money that we hear from Google and other big tech are now trying to break through on the Republican side? What do you think is going on there?
I think it's because Republicans and conservatives aren't really willing to say what exactly they have a difference of opinion on with the left and their entire moral worldview. All they know is that it may be going a little too fast. We need to basically do the exact same thing, just 27% slower or something like that. The right in the United States, or at least the ruling class on the right, they don't have their own independent vision of what it would look like if you gave them power and let them rule for 100 years. They don't know how they would defend ordinary people, ordinary families, how they would defend the interests of this country. They have accepted all of the moral premises that the left has, their moral premises on race, on transgenderism, on gender, on the workplace, on the economy. And the only thing they can tell their voters is, we're going to do all of that, or we're going to do it just a little bit slower. I think thankfully the base base is starting to wake up to this, and they're craving an alternative vision for what it would look like to have Republican and conservative governance. It's a lot of what got President Trump elected. It's a lot of what makes people like Ron DeSantis so popular. The problem is that the ruling class on the right is going to keep on holding on to power, desperately clutching onto it until it's taken away from them. And that's the task ahead for patriots this decade, is to make them finally give it up and to put it in the hands of people who will say there is an American way of life. It's not just what the left tells you, minus 20%. And we're going to defend it, and we're going to do everything we can to make it easier for ordinary people to live decent, moral, virtuous lives in this country. We're not just going to worship at the altar of the biggest corporations in America.
That's exactly right. It's all about human flourishing. I think we need to grow a backbone and talk about God and be very vocal about that, because that's the only thing that's going to get us out of this mess. And too often you hear too many Republicans just say, I want to be against whatever the crazy left is, but then they don't really know exactly why that is. And so they need to be very forthright about this so that they know where they're coming from and where, human beings, where we're heading. But Saurabh, always a pleasure to have you on. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.